Welcome to this edition of Real Talk with Sam Holcman. I'm Sam Holcman, and this particular broadcast is actually a follow-up to a broadcast that I did on June 26, 2019. Yes, June 26, 2019. The broadcast was titled, "Get Over It, the Hackers Have Won." This particular episode of Real Talk, our title is, "Our Cyber Protectors Have Failed Us, a Call to Action." Perhaps we should think about cybersecurity now using the term we are actually in, a cybersecurity pandemic. To recap my June 26, 2019 broadcast, I just want to read the introduction to this particular broadcast because it is still relevant today. Here is the introduction to this past broadcast. It may sound a bit of a strange phrase or topic, but hopefully as we spend the next hour together, you'll see why I believe that this is a massive concern that really needs to be addressed, rather than what we are seeing going on today, frankly, which is finger pointing. Finger pointing is great, but that doesn't mean anything is going to be addressed. So let us get started, and we hope that you do receive some benefits from this episode. The path is clear. The path is logical. It really is not that complicated. Yes, it is probably a bit different than what you are doing now. Organizations embarking on this approach that we'll be discussing and changing that way they are doing business will benefit. This will not be achieved next Monday morning. Fundamentally, what is the change that we are referring to? Stop writing computer code and start assembling software. Why should there be resistance? Change. Change is hard. We will lay out the path. The next steps are yours. This is the end of the introduction to my previous broadcast. After this broadcast, and my previous discussions with some of our clients, we have been looking at this concept of software assembly well before the recent set of massive cybersecurity breaches. None of us really know what the true effect of these latest security cyber attacks are, and what may occur tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. It turns out that, like in 2019, there are two fundamental issues. One is, how do you actually look at this situation and determine what the issues are with the term that is being used, your supply chain, your software development and deployment supply chain. From you to your end solution, what are the programs, processes, vendors, connections, etc., 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 that make up this chain? And if there is an issue, how do you find out where that issue is? Most organizations, unfortunately, do not have a baseline for addressing and managing change. And not just for cyber attacks, but for the changes that occur in the normal event of business activities and software development. The baseline to us is straightforward. It is a blueprint and is more, like contemporary terms, an architecture. An architecture that is explicit at excruciating levels of detail that describe the path from concept to customer through all the various chain elements that need to be looked at. The other issue is, quite directly, writing more and more computer code. Writing code, whether it's agile or waterfall or whatever handcrafting approach you are using, is a maturity level 1, industrial age, antiquated approach. Whether it's done quickly, using contemporary terms like agility, or using development cycles, fundamentally what is being done in the industry is what I refer to as handcrafting. And it does not matter if the software is new, old, in-house, in the cloud, provided by a vendor, a package, or provided as a service. We need to get to an assembly process, which is maturity level 3. The phrase that is used in manufacturing for decades is assemble to order. Assemble to order is key to an agile enterprise and much, much more secure environment that comes with that. Also, we are seeing a continuation of what we saw in 2019, which is continuing finger pointing. I do not want to at all reduce the importance of finding who these evil-doing culprits are. It's very important. But we are taking the focus off what really needs to be done, which is what is referred to as root cause analysis. What are the real issues? How do we address these issues while, yes, looking for the culprits? And the issues are, once again, two things: poor software and software development practices, and secondly, a baseline for addressing and managing change. Now, the finger pointing. There is a lot of finger pointing going on right now. And there's a lot of discussion about nation states that are doing evil. A little later in this broadcast, I'm going to provide you with some understanding from a series of articles that I have read that there are a significant number of cyber attacks going on beyond the most commonly referenced organizations that are widely pointed out today. The sources of cybersecurity threats can be, yes, nation states, and they can be terrorists, and they can be unhappy insiders, and they can be hackers, and they can be business competitors, and they can be organized crime groups, and they can be industrial spies, and they can be individuals, and they can be criminal organizations. What we're finding is cyber warfare or cyber penetration is the new form of terrorism or criminal activities or industrial espionage or whatever you want to call it. And what we need to recognize is that the way that the software community, or if you have your own internal organization that develops software, addresses these issues is by using the word patch, or something like that. Patching systems or finding flaws or vulnerabilities or updating or versioning or whatever is a reflection of one of those underlying issues that to some degree is the gateway to cyber attacks, poor software development practices. When we jiggle something, when we move something, when we change something, what are the possible effects on everything else that surround the jiggle? We have to remember, the evildoers only need to find one hole. We have to make sure there are no holes. There are things that need to be done well outside of this broadcast, of course. Making sure that passwords are good and changed periodically. Making sure that the software is up to date from the vendors or internally. Virus protection is up to date, and all of these other things that you commonly hear about. Of course, these actions are required in the interim, especially to move to a more secure environment. But I need to stress the issue is well beyond these after-the-fact attempts at security. The fundamental issues are present software development practices and a baseline for addressing and managing change that does not exist. The root cause that is allowing these hackers, these cyber criminals, to do whatever they're doing are those issues. Let us for a moment provide you with an analogy that may be useful. A number of years ago, the Ring Doorbell product was developed. There are many variations of that product today right now. When I looked at the development, I realized there was a paradigm shift, a fundamental change that was thought about that resulted in the doorbell that you see now. What was that change, the paradigm shift? Quite simple, as a matter of fact. Instead of telling us or you or me that someone is in your home without an invitation, or someone is in our office that we would find through normal intrusion and alarm techniques, what the Ring Doorbell said was, why don't I give you a notification prior to someone entering your home or your office? Sounds kind of simple. but it was a change in thinking that was very uncomfortable to the traditional vendors of security products. What we are talking about now is the traditional software vendors having that same type of unease, that they have to change the way they do business. They have to look in the mirror, and the people writing the software have to look in the mirror and say, we need to fundamentally change the way we approach providing solutions to our stakeholders. It is uneasy. To provide more understanding of the magnitude of this cybersecurity issue, we have to recognize that the people that are trying to protect us are writing the software in the same way that I'm suggesting. And this is providing the cyber criminals with access to our most cherished assets. One of the prime examples is, in June 2018, the phrase that was used in one of the articles on a cybersecurity issue was, "Has LifeLock been unlocked?" In other words, the company that provides us with the protection, their own software was penetrated. So it's like the locksmith cannot keep their own house secure, let alone our house. Please recognize I'm only providing examples and trying not to point fingers. The list of breached software is unfortunately quite large. I want you to understand that I'm providing you with examples how deep this issue is. It is way beyond just finger pointing at one or two software vendors or software products. Continuing for just a moment with the situation at LifeLock. There was work done to show that it was actually poor programming practices, as we're discussing now, that allowed the cyber incident to happen, not misconfiguration of files or things like that. Root cause analysis is what we now need to do more than ever when we see these things. Hackers are not just hacking organizations. Cyber criminals are not just attacking systems. They're going after the big hitters too. Why go after a little group when I can penetrate a central repository of information and get 18,000 plus organizations at the same time? I think you know the magnitude of ransomware attacks that also have occurred in major cities in the United States and elsewhere. These cities have a choice to make: pay the money or wait it out. And the hackers are actually exploiting vulnerabilities in the security systems and the security software itself. So we have a situation where there is no real easy solution of trying to address these things in the present environment because, once again, we are missing two fundamental things that are the subject of this broadcast. The city of Atlanta was asked for about $50,000 in ransomware, and of course, to be paid using Bitcoin. They said no. They endured millions of dollars in losses from the attack, according to the attorneys that were working on this issue. I'm not suggesting we pay ransom, but we can see the magnitude of the problem time and time again. Gaming sites, very popular in our community today. According to one statistic, 12 billion attacks against gaming sites in the past 17 months. I'm very uncomfortable when I say this. That is what we know about or believe. As the phrase goes, we do not know what we do not know. Let us now look at computer hardware. We have to remember that within most hardware today is what? Software. And those software development practice inside the hardware, same level 1 maturity. We have make to order, handcrafting going on. And what we see are the same issues going on in software within hardware we see in other software development organizations. You sometimes hear the term backdoor in some of the hardware equipment. In other words, penetration approaches that possibly or probably the buying customer doesn't know about. that in some cases were installed by somebody. Perhaps, in all probability, the vendor themselves, and some of it may be for good reason. But the other reason could be evildoers, intentional or not, that have discovered these back doors. The other thing we must recognize is that the vast number of people and entities that are being subject to these types of criminal acts and penetrations are growing. 2019, once again. I know that I'm the recipient of diagnostics through a company called Quest, a very, very prestigious company that does medical diagnostics. Almost 12 million patient records affected by a breach. I do not know exactly what that resulted in, and I don't know the effect on my personal life. But I can tell you one thing, I'm not too happy about it. And one of the things I'm really not happy about is, once again, that we really don't know what the effect of this penetration is. I may sound like a broken record. We do not have a baseline. We have no idea what actually has been changed in the computer software as we move forward. In that same 2019 timeframe was when organizations started realizing the complexities that have been added to their and other technology environments that they've created themselves. Outsourcing, offshoring, right sourcing, near sourcing, cloud computing, software packages, all of these things have increased the supply chain complexity. There are handoffs, there is code, there is middleware. There are all of these things that we now need to understand. Not remove necessarily, but understand. The phrase, once again, a baseline for addressing and managing change. We have added significantly to the complexity of our environments. And in actuality, we are aware of the desire in some cases, the desire to increase complexity. Some people actually revel in complexity. The danger is that we have the supply chain, in most cases, driven by cost, slashing cost, reducing cost. That's been the mantra. And within that could be part of the reason why we are seeing the massive increase in attacks that are out there. There's no penalty for a company or suppliers being hacked. Actually kind of crazy, isn't it? I'm sure the automobile industry would like this model. Put the stuff out there and not worry about the consequences if it breaks. Sorry to be so direct, but sometimes we need to. Some of you may have been thinking the best approach today may be, I should pay the ransom. By the way, if this is what you're asking, in most recent cyber attacks, there was no ransom demand. The objective of these attacks was intellectual property theft, not locking organizations out of their computers, but penetrating their networks for evil purposes or getting an understanding of the things that are very, very uncomfortable to us. So if you pay a ransom, $200,000, $300,000, $600,000, $1 million, what has been repaired? Do you think that the hackers are going to say, yep, we're out of there now? No problem. Or maybe they can tell you, or maybe they will tell you, yep, here's how we penetrated your network. What assurance, for goodness sake, do you have that they are telling you the truth now, or the partial truth, or none at all? They have no reason at all to be honest with you. They're not honest in the first place. So we have to recognize evil is evil. We have to look in the mirror and recognize that it's time for us to change the way that we write software and the way that we change software as we move forward in the information age that we are now in. Cloud and cloud computing. What is cloud computing? Quite simply, it's running your stuff on somebody else's computer. That may sound simplistic, but that really is what it is. We recognize that the cloud has allowed easier and on purpose access to our systems, both for good and evil intents. There is exponential growth in connected devices. And whether you call them smart homes or smart offices, all different types of devices, all of those devices that were developed with the same maturity level 1 software development techniques are much more easily accessible. What does that lead to? Even more increased complexity, more configurations that are very, very difficult to monitor and manage. It's a two-edged sword. All the benefits that come with cloud computing, the big downside is added complexity. You may think the cloud is more secure, and I don't have an opinion about that either way. I do want to suggest that the software for cloud computing was written in the same way as other software, handcrafting. If you accept for a moment that it may be more secure, fine. Just put that argument aside for a moment. The management complexities are still there. The added complexities are still there. And that brings us back to one of the two things that we really need to do, which is a baseline for addressing and managing change. Especially in the extremely complex and sometimes not obvious cloud computing supply chain. That is not going to disappear. So all of the breaches that we are talking about and the ability of hackers to hack has actually been aided to some degree, and some say to a very high degree, by moving to the cloud. The concentration in most organizations has been and still is around new controls or enhancing existing controls and then saying, are we identifying and implementing those controls correctly in our enterprise? We suggest, unfortunately, that this is totally inadequate. It is inadequate because we do not know what we don't know. Testing does not tell us that a product is good. Testing says that these tests were conducted and have passed. Scenario plans, use cases, all of these phrases that you hear are no guarantee that you've adequately covered whatever field or domain you're looking at. I do not want to suggest to stop doing these things. I do want you to understand the limitations. All of these things are after-the-fact approaches to address the core issue, which is maturity, the lack of maturity in the software development practices that we have. In the new complex supply chains most organizations have, there are a series of events that are now very important for us to understand. We have our infrastructure in our enterprise, the technology infrastructure, the telecommunications infrastructure, the compute infrastructure. We have the applications that sit on top of those infrastructures. We have the devices that are used to access those applications. We have sensors. We have the Internet of Things. These things are voice activated or triggered by transmissions or proximity sensors or retinal eye scanners or whatever, etc., etc. Sort of just like the Mission Impossible movies and more. We add to this the cloud. We have the rest of the supply chain to add to that environment. Now you have to change one thing and be cognizant of the hardware, software, and features and whatever else is going on. Do you, your organization, have an accurate and detailed, excruciating level of detail, real-time inventory of all these assets and how they're connected? I think, unfortunately, the answer is probably no. Can your organization, without that information, answer a question that I'm sure every board of director member wants an answer to? The question is, what is our risk to a cyber attack, whether it is an intellectual property cyber attack, whether it is an information cyber attack, or whether it is ransomware? What is our risk? How do you answer that question? Let us remember that one of the most recent incidences is the penetration of some of the most valued networks and assets in the United States of America. At the same time, we should not forget the approximately 3.5 billion people that saw their personal data stolen from the top 2 of the 15 biggest breaches in this century alone. This is astounding. So we have to look at what is happening now in the light of all the other breaches that occurred and recognize that if we think this is a one-off situation, we are sadly mistaken. We need to have a baseline for addressing and managing change. We need to change our software development practices to move to a more robust maturity level. Let us look at the most recent of the cyber attacks that have occurred, which is the premise behind why I've come to the airways once again on this issue. The SolarWinds situation, the SolarWinds company. I don't know if you want to call it a SolarWinds issue or a cybersecurity issue, but basically the numbers that are being talked about here are very scary. About 425 of the United States Fortune 500 companies are believed to be affected by this. Just think about the number of people in those organizations. We do not know what we don't know. Just think about the intellectual property in those organizations. Just think about how much damage is or can be caused because of these breaches. Of course, horribly, we recognize that some of our government organizations at the federal level, according to published reports, have been affected by this. The military, the Pentagon, the State Department, hundreds of universities and colleges, all with that information that is now somewhat in the public domain to some degree. We also have to recognize that we have to think about software developers as being the pathway to these developments. Not on purpose, of course. The baseline for addressing and managing change is the software development process that really needs to be understood, and underneath that should be an enterprise or business architecture, which is the baseline for addressing and managing change throughout history. I'm not talking about information technology planning, which is masquerading in some organizations as business architecture or enterprise architecture. I'm not talking about the people that have taken a multiple guess exam and declared themselves or been dubbed business architects or enterprise architects. Caveat emptor, hiring managers and chief information officers. Real business architects and real enterprise architects are one of the keys to moving forward in one of the 2 areas I'm discussing. The other key is moving away from handcrafting solutions to the concept of assembling solutions from secured, certified, protected assets. Assemble to order, maturity level 3. We also need to think about making sure that the connections through our supply chain are actually at a minimum. What do we mean by that? Not everything needs to be connected to everything. We should be able to look and see what the essence is of what needs to be connected to something else. What needs to be changed prior to the change being made, determine the effects of that change prior to the actual change occurring. That is what we need. When SolarWinds found out they were possibly part of a compromised environment, they told all their customers, please upgrade very, very quickly. The assumption was that this will ensure the environment is safer. Let me ask you a question. How do you know that? How does SolarWinds know that? How do you know that these changes have not opened up other penetration possibilities because of the complexity that exists and there is no baseline to view? I'm not saying, once again, do not upgrade the software as you're being told. But are they able to see the effects of one change to the other or another change? You can see that is time to examine through root cause analysis the issues in the industry The conclusion I have drawn is job one is addressing maturity level of the software development process. Of course, we have our lawmakers. They're pounding their fists on the table. We want details of the damage done. We need to put a committee together. As a matter of fact, we need 3 committees, or whatever the number is that you choose. We need a committee chairperson. These are all wonderful. To do what? Formally finger point. And as this finger pointing is going on, what are the evildoers doing? You think they're shaking in their boots? I think not. I do hope there is some resources that are being dedicated to address the core issues rather than just finger pointing. Maybe Congress should have another committee on cybersecurity, or whatever you want to call it. While these committees are talking about the issues and refining the pointing issue techniques, some people have to get to work and look at the core issues and address the core issues. Well, we have to recognize laws help. As the phrase goes, though, locks keep honest people honest. Laws are those for people that believe there is reason to follow the law. The practice of producing software is not really a profession in most organizations yet. The software development practices are all over the place. There are a lot of people that consider software development actually more of an art form than a science. You have open source, you have algorithms, you have one product that plugs into another product, that plugs into another product, that plugs into another product. That commercial chain that we're talking about, a product commercially sits between A, B, and C, or is C and is A, the supply chain software concept. Where's the provenance? Where is the stuff coming from? Where's the traceability? The industry, the software development industry, is very, very young. It jumps from one silver bullet to the next, as the phrase goes, and sometimes back again. One of the phrases that caused me to pause recently is minimal viable product. I shuddered when I heard that phrase, forgive me. The idea of getting code out the door and worrying about it later is contributing to the cyber issues that we have right now. How do you measure viability? Is it that the computer compiler found no errors in the software syntax? Where are we going to get in the next step of viability? Minimal what? Minimal what? Cost? Functionality? Risk? Are the hackers going to be there before we are more viable? Should we have more regulation in the computer and software industry as we have in other professions and other industries? Let's for a moment look at medicine. One of the reasons that the medical community has had to react, one reason, is because of the penalties for errors or glitches or tweaks, as we call them in software. Whoops is a real problem in the medical community. Maybe we need penalties for bad software, rather than putting up with the multiple upgrades and glitches and tweaks and changes on a weekly or monthly basis. Maybe we need some guarantees, if I can use that phrase. Is this what the software development community needs to accelerate the movement to a professional practice and the movement to assemble to order concepts? This will not fix everything. And I'm actually not a fan of penalties or this type of pressure. But I am starting to believe that the software development swamp needs to be drained. We had some situations where, unfortunately, a few airliners have crashed for various reasons. After the emotion subsided, the people involved in looking at the cause of these crashes had what? Had a baseline, a traceable and transparent set of understandings, so they could start looking at and studying these baselines to figure out what happened and hopefully make sure that it didn't happen again. We don't have this in the software business. Mistakes, let us start calling them mistakes, may happen just like in the world of building complex engineering products like airplanes. In that profession, you have a series of descriptive representations at excruciating levels of detail that can be reviewed to start figuring out what went wrong. We need to remember that the discovery of the software penetration in SolarWinds situation was discovered somewhat by accident. Then the cure, so to speak, was going through lines of computer code to try to determine what the change was through the evildoers. Okay, were all the changes found? Why don't we call the evildoers and ask them? Not funny at all. Already discovered uncomfortably, there are more entry points into our world of software than just the SolarWinds software. Concentrating on SolarWinds is a short-term strategy. I know we feel good when we have someone to point a finger at, in addition to whoever actually did the evil act. There are other paths that are known now that have nothing to do with SolarWinds and are able to get into the complex, sophisticated environments that our technology is in today. The recent attack has been uncomfortable. We now recognize there is a supply chain in software that is not well described, documented, modeled, or explicitly represented. This has come to light, and this is a real issue. Evildoers and hackers have been able to penetrate the computer networks in many different areas. So we are recognizing that the concept of software is really what is being attacked. Not one company, not one vendor, but the root cause, software development practices. One recent vivid example of this happens to be the SolarWinds situation. In preparing for this broadcast, another thing that really set me back was that some of the experts are looking at this particular incident and suggest that this particular attack has been in the making to some degree for 4 years. 4 years. What else is out there that's percolating? We don't know. Lots of excitement and lots of energy being expended in this situation, which is just marvelous. But we have to recognize there could be another 4 years of planning going on right now by those same evildoers. They have patience. Maybe they are in 3 years of the 4-year cycle, or year 2 of the 4-year cycle. Are we going to have to look at 250,000 lines of computer code the next time to find the needle in the needle stack? Yes, I said it the way I did, and I intended it. I know we forget about the pain from the year 2000 software debacle. Do you know about the year 2038 software issue that's coming around the corner? I just think about the billions of lines of code that are out there now and some tremendous talent that was applied to provide solutions that we all enjoy. Just a while ago, Federal Express reported that one of their cyber incidents cost the company $400 million. You know what I would like to ask the CEO or CIO of Federal Express? How about taking 1% of that money, investing in the future of software development and developing a baseline for addressing and managing change? Merck put a recent cyber incident at the cost value of $670 million to the CEO or CIO of Merck. I asked the same question. How about taking 1% of that money, investing in the future of solid software development and developing a baseline for addressing and managing change? I would think that the stockholders would applaud these efforts. And maybe they already are, and that would be great. Perhaps you can take 1% of your technology budget and invest that in the understanding of the concepts of assemble to order and building a baseline for addressing managing change the next time this is going to happen. Yes, it's going to happen again and again and again. And we have to recognize that it's foolish for us to believe that the current cyber attacks and the way those attacks occurred are the only things that are going to affect us in the future. We know from everything that has been reported that understanding the scope and magnitude of this security issue is still in its early stages. Most reports that I have read say it will take months and possibly years before the true scope of the damage is understood. If you're at Cisco, or you are at Intel, or if you're at NVIDIA, or the accounting firm of Deloitte, or VMware, or Belkin, or the California Department of State Hospitals, or Kent State University, or anyone else out there, or any one of the 18,000 companies that were possibly part of SolarWinds' customer base, what is your plan for moving forward? I applaud the efforts of a number of companies that have gotten together to try to come up with a consistent response to ransomware. Fantastic. These very prestigious companies have gotten together to address the cyber attacks at the back end of the attack. We hope these same companies and other companies come together to look at a plan to develop and mature the software development practices and the concepts of architecture for developing the baseline for addressing and managing change moving forward. The industry is also looking at new practices that at first glance seem to be a great idea. The concept of software factories. I think that's the common phrase that is now being used. It is not do software factories, but recognize you have a situation where you now have a focal point that cyber attackers can look at and say, if we penetrate this factory, look at how much damage we can do. After all, the software development practices in the factory are, in all probability, the same that we were able to penetrate successfully in the past. For those of you that are looking at cyber currencies like Bitcoin, of course, that would be the most common name that we see out there today in cyber currencies, recognize that it was behind the facade. What is behind the facade is software. And that software was built how? Not to think that this is funny, but to bring a little smile to all our faces. I also think we remember Twitter was hit by a spear phishing cyber attack, which is a form of cyber hacking also. It was a number of teenagers and a few other people that took control of major figures' Twitter accounts, including President Biden, Elon Musk, and some people at Apple. If they're subject to these things, imagine what you and I could be subject to. Be careful if you are pointing fingers. You may be the next evildoer target. Whoa. To bring this a bit closer to you and I, in December 2020, there was an article about siphoning off $36 billion, B with a B, in fraudulent unemployment claims in the United States. We all know how devastating all these things were occurring to the workplace here in the United States because of the COVID situation. But you know what? People are taking advantage of these things. How did that happen? Well, you don't have to go to the unemployment office to make this theft happen. In one article, it described an engineering student in a foreign country that estimated he made $50,000 since the pandemic began by filling out fraudulent claims. What he did was compile a list of real people, got a database of hacked information about those people for $2 a person, that had the name, date of birth, and social security number of that person, and then went off and filed fraudulent claims. And as he said with a bit of pride in his voice, it was easy money. Another form of cyber terrorism. And he said, I can do this from anywhere. $36 billion of our money. Maybe we should take 1/100th of 1% of that money and look at new software development practices and a baseline for addressing and managing change. Wouldn't that be great? as a lot of states were focusing on a different level of fraud, focusing on whether or not residents are filing fraudulent unemployment claims, our cyber hacker friends overseas, if I can use the word friends, were sitting behind computers having a great time breaking into our systems. Of course, because of this, the people who really needed their unemployment funds were sometimes held up for quite a bit of time as all of these systems were inundated with false claims. Some of these were legitimate people trying to collect their unemployment. It turns out that they were the recipients of this fraud situation and victims of the fraud situation and couldn't get the funds that were due to them. Some of those real people had to go and prove they didn't receive the payments. Some of the state agencies were demanding funds back from these fraud victims because the states believed that these people received payments inaccurately and incorrectly. My goodness, what a mess. Some of these victims spent months struggling through the system to get the states to recognize they weren't the fraud perpetrators. They were the victims of the fraud. As you can see, I have many more articles that I can bring to your attention. My stack of events and articles is getting thicker. I want to leave you with one more example before we suggest an action plan. This event is from mid-January 2021. The title of a number of articles like this is "The Iranian Government Tried to Recruit United States Hackers on LinkedIn." This is kind of a bold action. Elements of this article are what I'd like to point out. The first, it is not the Russians. Next, the offer for this one individual to work for the Iranian government was for a hacking role. The offer was for $100,000 a month. Let me state again, $100,000 a month, recruited through LinkedIn. The recruiting grooming cycle for this individual was 3 years. Talk about patience. Years-long campaign to recruit this individual at an incredible sum of money. Just think about why the organization can pay this sum of money and what their upside is. I know that on LinkedIn there are policies that prohibit this type of recruiting. But I'm also sure that the evildoers, as you can see, don't care. Finger-pointing doesn't make any difference to these types of people, of course. This individual was finally asked directly, could you provide training courses on hacking critical infrastructure with the focus on nuclear facilities? Talk about boldness. At that point, the individual went to authorities and said, whoa, this has gotten out of control. What we suggest is if you don't have the hackers that you need, as you can see, what can you do? You can go out and buy them. Hack for hire. Short hours, good pay. My goodness. Now, of course, once this settled down a bit, the individual had a tough time because this individual was allegedly threatened by Iranian operatives that called this individual an enemy of the Iranian state. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. What is my call to action to you listening? Number one, believe to a high degree what you're hearing. This is a pandemic, a cyber pandemic. If that term is what we need to say, then let's say it. It is a crisis, a cyber crisis. It's not going away, and it's probably going to get worse. What do I suggest? Or what do I ask my listening audience to do? We need a few of you with resources to be that bold to come together. 5 to 9 organizations, government, industry, academia. Sit down and put together a plan to do 2 things. 1, examine the maturity of the software industry to move it from a make to order to through a pride from stock environment to assemble to order, which will dramatically reduce the chances of penetration. Secondly, at the same time, developing this concept of a baseline for addressing and managing the supply chain. Let me use the term a baseline to understand so that we can see the effects of one part of the supply chain change and what the effects are of that change on the other parts of the supply chain. The phrase that I use to describe the second requirement, of course, is enterprise architecture or business architecture. A blueprint, or whatever term is that you like. My call to action is to form a small group of you that will actually be committed to this effort. It would be wonderful to hear from hundreds, if not thousands of you. But that's not going to be effective at this point. We want a small group of dedicated people to take 90 to 100 days to look at this and develop an actionable plan of action. There's going to be a transition state. There's going to be an as-is state that is different in many organizations. And there will fundamentally be a desired state that we all need to define. I don't know what the final state date is going to be at this point. But if we do not begin tomorrow, that date is just farther off. What's the end objective in the short term? A work plan to move the maturity in the software and technology industry collectively from where it is today to an environment that is not only more secure, but will actually be more profitable, more agile, as the phrase goes, in both the development of software solutions, bring more agility to the enterprise, and the ability to understand and manage change. Please join me in this crucial activity. The most recent cyber attack on the Oldsmar, Florida water supply, the recruitment on LinkedIn by alleged Iranian operatives for cyber attack training, and the multitudes of incidents well outside the highly publicized SolarWinds breach should put us on notice that this battle is just beginning. The trend to me is clear. Incidences will increase. And we should examine the root cause of these incidents and chart a path to address these very fundamental issues. I stand ready to assist, to provide a more detailed briefing if you're interested, and of course participate as a member of this team moving forward. Thank you for your time. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me. It would be my pleasure to speak to you. Stay well, stay healthy, and let us move forward and attack this virus, this pandemic, with the energy that we are putting into the attack that we see on other viruses and pandemics that we are subject to. Thank you very much for listening. Stay well and stay healthy, and I look forward to hearing from you.